Thank you for joining us. Our show today is dedicated to Jerusalem Day, the Israeli national holiday that commemorates both the reunification of Jerusalem, and it is marked officially throughout Israel and elsewhere in the world with state ceremonies and memorial services. Mark Goldman will share his thoughts on Jerusalem following these messages.
Life Extension magazine brings you new discoveries in health and anti-aging. Our science-based research and supplements are so advanced they're many years ahead of the medical mainstream, with quality control standards that exceed FDA mandates. Life Extension has covered groundbreaking medical research for more than 35 years. For your health and future, you deserve the best. Learn more at lifeextension.com.
Jerusalem, a historical journey through archaeology and art. Jerusalem, a mosaic of different peoples, faiths, and nationalities. Nevertheless, despite this diversity, under the sovereignty of Israel, Jerusalem is a city that works. But has it always been this way? The first historical mention of Jerusalem is in the Bible, in the era of the patriarchs. King David declares Jerusalem as Israel's capital, known from that point on also as Zion. His son King Solomon builds the first temple. But the temple is destroyed by the Babylonians, and the Jews are exiled. King Cyrus's declaration enables the Jews to return and rebuild the temple. Alexander the Great's conquests include Jerusalem. However, his successors desecrate the temple, which leads to the Maccabees' revolt against the Greeks' imposition of Hellenism. The Roman Empire seizes control, and King Herod renovates the temple. A large-scale revolt against a corrupt and vicious Roman reign fails. The Second Temple is destroyed, and the Jews are banned from Jerusalem. 60 years pass, and Bar Kokhba leads another revolt for the freedom of Jerusalem. But it fails after 3 years of battle. Jews are banned from the city, renamed by the Romans Aelia Capitolina, in order to eradicate its Jewish heritage. Roman Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity and reinforces the ban on Jews entering Jerusalem. A new religion, Islam, sweeps through the Middle East. Non-Muslims are declared second-class citizens. Crusaders conquer Jerusalem in a bloodbath of Jews and Muslims. 2,000 Jews are burnt alive in the main synagogue, and the city is depopulated of its previous inhabitants. The first organized mass Jewish return arrives from France and England. The Mamluks defeat the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem, and building and renovating of synagogues and churches is banned. The great Mishnai commentator Rabbi Ovadia of Bartanura settles in Jerusalem. The Ottoman Empire takes over, imposing restrictions on Jews and Christians, and Sultan Suleiman rebuilds the walls. But as the empire declines, Jerusalem is badly neglected. Still, the Jewish people stream back, build new neighborhoods, and re-establish their majority by 1863. World War I breaks out. The Ottoman Empire collapses and makes room for a new Middle East. The British Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, declares the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people. Britain receives a mandate to create a Jewish homeland, but forbids Jews from blowing the shofar or reading holy scrolls at the Western Wall. Thousands of Muslims are incited to unleash an attack against Jews in Jerusalem and Hebron. 86 Jews are brutally murdered, hundreds are wounded.
Egypt
UN Resolution 181 declares Jerusalem as a corpus separatum, a separate entity. A Jewish state is declared as Jerusalem is put under siege, conquered and divided. 58 synagogues are destroyed or desecrated. Harsh limitations are imposed on Jews and Christians for 19 years. The Six-Day War. Jerusalem is reunited and freedom and equality are restored. Throughout history, only Israel has protected the freedom of all peoples and faiths in Jerusalem.
On this exact day, 70 years ago, at almost this exact time, David Ben-Gurion declared Israel's independence. Just 11 minutes later, President Harry Truman caused the United States to be the very first nation to recognize the reborn state of Israel. He later regretted that he waited so long. 70 years since that memorable event, almost to the minute, the United States finally takes the next step, a step awaited, voted upon, litigated, and prayed for all these years. Today, we opened the United States Embassy in Jerusalem, Israel. Again, the United States leads the way as the first nation to do so. So many have worked so hard and for so long for this day to come, and they all deserve our thanks. But make no mistake, today's historic event is attributed to the vision, the courage, and the moral clarity of one person to whom we owe an enormous and eternal debt of gratitude, President Donald J. Trump. We have among us an extraordinary gathering of American patriots and Israeli leaders. I'd like to recognize a few of them. From our host country, the President of the State of Israel, His Excellency Reuven Rivlin, and wishing the best to your wife, Nechama. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his wife, Sarah. The Mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barkat, and his wife, Beverly. The Speaker of the Knesset, Yuli Edelstein, and his wife, Irina. The Leader of the Opposition, Isaac Herzog, and his wife, Michal. The Deputy Chief Justice of the Israel Supreme Court, Hanan Meltzer. The Head of the Israel Defense Forces, General Gadi Eisenkot. The Ashkenazi Chief Rabbi of Israel, Rav David Lau. The Sephardi Chief Rabbi of Israel, Rav Yitzchak Yosef. And the former Chief Rabbi of Israel, Rav Yisrael Meir Lau. And all the ministers, cabinet members, members of the Knesset, members of the IDF, mayors, and religious leaders. From the executive branch of the United States government, it is my pleasure to welcome the leader of the President's delegation, the Deputy Secretary of State, John J. Sullivan. And the 77th Secretary of the Treasury, Stephen Mnuchin. President Trump's senior advisor, Jared Kushner. President Trump's daughter and senior advisor, Ivanka Trump. President Trump's special representative for international negotiations, Jason Greenblatt. The United States Ambassador to Italy, Lou Eisenberg. Assistant Secretary of State, Nicole Nason, and Acting Assistant Secretary of State, David Satterfield. From the legislative branch, we have 4 senators whose support for Israel is legendary. Senator Lindsey Graham. Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Dean Heller, and Senator Mike Lee. Thank you for coming. And from our House of Representatives, a delegation led by Congressman Joe Wilson, Congressman Tom Rice, Congressman Steve Knight, Congressman Dennis Ross, Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, Congressman Jody Heiss, Congressman Scott Taylor, Congressman Lee Zeldin, Congressman George Holding, and Congressman Ron DeSantis. Just last year, Congressman DeSantis stood at a podium here in Jerusalem and made a passionate and compelling case that this day would come. And so it has. I'd also like to welcome the governor of my home state of Florida, who also has been a strong advocate for Jerusalem, Governor Rick Scott. In 1995, the Jerusalem Embassy Act became law, voted in favor overwhelmingly by both houses of Congress, and led, I should add, by a former senator who is here today, Senator Joseph Lieberman. That law, which was reaffirmed just last year by a vote of 90-0 in the Senate, declared Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel and mandated the move of the embassy. 23 long years have passed since the transfer of the embassy became the law of the land. But today, we keep our promise to the American people, and we extend to Israel the same right we extend to every other nation, the right to designate its capital city.
With us now is Mark Goldman. Mark, it's good to have you back with us.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's a pleasure to be back here.
We just saw this video clip on basically on the history of the city of King David and King Solomon, the city of Jerusalem. And good Lord, several thousand years old. And it is so interesting to look at history and get a correct, truthful perspective. So what are your thoughts with regard to this video clip we just saw, which clearly points out these milestones in the history of the city of Jerusalem?
Well, I think that so many of the interesting aspects of it are part of what you just described, but there's so much more. And as you show in your logo, USA is right in the middle of Jerusalem. And so the fact that Israel, from the period that you're referring to, thousands and thousands of years ago, was the first nation founded on the basis of a nation under God. And then America, hundreds of years ago, was the second nation ever founded on that basis. Shows the difference of the source of Western civilization and what we call good behavior. And that's what it really comes down to. And that's what we have forgotten about lately, and we need to be reminded of and behave accordingly.
Approximately, what was the year in which Jerusalem was founded?
Well, it was 3,400 years ago when the Torah was first given at Mount Sinai, and then 40 years later, the Jews were led into Israel, and Jerusalem was the capital, and all the events which are historically provable, and all the different things which are found and have been continued to be found over these last many years of digging up what's been there, prove that all the biblical stories are accurate and reflect exactly what happened.
When did Jerusalem become important to Christianity?
Well, I mean, there's been so many variations, if you will, that have taken Judaism and then made their own direction, even among Jews. I mean, you have the Orthodox who follow what it says, and then you have Reform who make up their own rules. So you have that from many different people, but the foundation still comes from what the Torah and what's called the Old Testament now.
Also very interesting. And Mark, so many people in the world all understand that from a Christian point of view, Judaism became important to them 2,022 years ago. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's the year we're celebrating now. But again, Israel was founded well over 1,000 years prior to that, and the basis of all the things that we consider civilized behavior. And that's the big thing that we forget about, that we take for granted. We think we're born good. We need a lot of teaching to act in the way that we think is good behavior. It takes a lot of teaching.
And of course, 1,300 years ago, 700 years after Christianity was founded, we have Islam now claiming that Jerusalem is so extremely, terribly important to them, even though in the 7th century when Islam was founded, until the Six-Day War, in fact, last century, no Arab head of state even bothered ever to visit Jerusalem. It suddenly became extremely important to them after Israel liberated Jerusalem. How do you explain that?
Well, I mean, Muslims seem to have this idea that have to take over everything. And their ideology, and they're not embarrassed to say it, that they want to, take over the world and rule it in their way. And they're willing to fly airplanes into buildings and do other crazy things like that in order to want to get their way. And so the behavior has no basis in any sense. And the actions that we see are not, what we call civilized behavior.
We'll find rational and irrational people everywhere, all over the Middle East and the world. And peace can be made, and hopefully it will be. But I'd like to ask you a little bit more as to how is it that Jerusalem is mentioned over 600 times in the Holy Bible, but not once in the Quran?
Well, first of all, the authorship of the Torah, the Old Testament, is not human authorship. And so it's clear what it says in there. These other books, the Quran including, is written by men, and therefore they made up what they wanted, and they picked Mecca as their place to worship. Jerusalem, as you say, is not even mentioned, except when the Jews had it, then all of a sudden they said, no, that's ours. I mean, when you want to make up whatever you want to make up, people do that. It has no basis in truth, has no basis in reality. Clearly, they built it on top of the temple, and what was clearly the temple, as they have done in so many other places, putting mosques over churches and other places of worship in an effort to show that they're going to dominate.
What a strange fact that is. And I'd like to ask you, On a positive note, since there are peace agreements and there's education and progress in so many areas with nations in the Middle East, Israel, Dubai, Bahrain and so forth, Egypt and Jordan, how do you see the future?
Well, I think that the threat of Iran to all of those countries, including Israel, obviously, is what had them rethink the attitude that they had previously taken towards Israel. And now that, from what I've heard from all kinds of different people who I've visited back and forth to many of these previously closed off to Jews, Arab countries, that the welcome is warm, that the interest in continuing to engage and do business and to visit back and forth. And, you know, in one respect, we're cousins. And so if you can be nice with your cousins, then you can make a wonderful thing. And they each have something to provide to each other in terms of making the world a better place, and the Israel technological thing and some of the oil money and other things like that are going to, I think, broadly expand that and have the cooperation become much better.
Well, yes, you're right, of course, and through peace and cooperation, the whole Middle East could flourish a lot more than it is right now.
Definitely, definitely. Well, but some of those that want to destroy have to be stopped. And obviously Iran is one of them. And unfortunately, in this country, we have those who are looking to destroy America. We have to stop that too.
Interesting how, despite progress in technology, education and science and all these things, it seems that there is also an expansion of stupidity in our world in general, whether it's in the United States, Europe or elsewhere. It just is incredible that people just seem to remain kind of stuck in a rather ignorant standard.
Well, I think it's more deliberate than that and it's very interesting that this is the topic that we're talking about, the founding of Israel and the Torah and all of those other things, because the other side seems to be saying that there is no right and wrong, and then there's no God. And so the behaviors and the things that they're saying, I mean, they want to be able to murder babies. They want to be able to covet whatever anybody else has. They want to be able to bear false witness. They want to dishonor the parents and just say the state only can decide who's going to learn or what kids are going to be taught. And continuing along those lines, which again comes to trying to erase the foundational basis of how America was founded as a nation under God, which all of our founding documents speak to. All men are created equal, and all the other things that are inherent in the founding of America. The other side is saying, no, it's no good and it's not right, and communism is better.
Well, it certainly seems that ideological guidance and conscience and good values is an essential part of what needs to be conveyed to the masses.
I couldn't agree more, and some of them are being bribed by free stuff. I saw a good joke the other day. The mouse was caught in a trap, and he said he didn't know why the cheese was free. So, but that's what's happening, free stuff that the government gives. But you look at every communist country, every socialist country, the people have nothing. And they have no opportunity because all incentive is removed from them. The government owns everything and has the right to everything. How hard is somebody going to work if they plant their farm and then they don't get to keep the crop? Makes no sense.
Do you believe that if truth were disseminated more widely or to a greater extent, that this would have a positive influence on misguided, ignorant masses?
Anyone who's at least open to hear the truth, I think it's anyone's obligation that knows the truth to be able to put it out there as much as they possibly can. Yes.
Well, as we conclude this observation of Jerusalem Day, what message would you share with our audience, Mark?
That we need to remember what the fundamental foundations are and how we would behave left to our own devices. And I think, for example, would be just looking at some of the left-run cities where the crime is going out of control, where prisoners are roaming the streets because they've been left out of prison, and all the other bad behaviors which come from these people. Whereas if we act in a lawful and proper way, that doesn't happen. And so let's appreciate that and have the right people making our rules.
Excessive permissiveness certainly does not seem to do the world much good. And I appreciate your point.
If I was going to say, imagine you have children and you continue to let them get away with bad behavior, you're only going to get more bad behavior. That's the only way it goes.
Seems to be, unfortunately, a fact. Mark, I'd like to thank you very, very much for being with us as we celebrate Jerusalem Day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Richard, and celebration to all. Thank you.
Thank you.
So many songs, so many stories, the rocks and hills recall. Within your heart, inside the city, the ancient stones, the wall, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, forever young, forever old. My heart will sing your song of glory, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, oh city with a heart of gold. My heart will.
This concludes our special show for today. I'm Richard Perrits on behalf of all of us here. Thank you for being with us.